Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to be back. It has been a very long time since I've shown my beautiful face on this channel. It has been almost 2 years, I think, since I did a video with me sitting down with the beautiful book backdrop, and I am super excited to be back and to be making true crime videos again. My kids are all finally in school, and so I have the time to dedicate to this channel and to the cases that I want to cover, so I'm super excited to be back. And I hope that you're excited to see me back. And so, yeah, we are not going to go into anything else. We are going to just jump straight into today's case. Today, we are talking about the disappearance of 2-year-old Teekah Lewis. Teekah went missing from Tacoma, Washington in 1999 when her family was on a huge family outing to a bowling alley. Before we get into her disappearance, though, I want to talk a little bit about Teekah and her family. So Teekah was born on July 4th, 1996 to Teresa English and Robert Lewis. Teresa had 3 other children from previous relationships, and Teekah was the first child that Teresa and Robert had together. The couple welcomed another child by the end of 1998. Teekah loved all of her sisters, but she was especially fond of her baby sister. She loved to dote on her and to take care of her, and she was just like a little mama to her baby sister. Like I said, at the time of her disappearance, Teekah was 2 years old. She was about 3 feet tall, and she weighed about 35 pounds. Teekah was biracial. She was Black and Caucasian. She had Chippewa descent. Teekah loved Starburst, and she loved French fries, and she loved Winnie the Pooh. That was her favorite character, and her mom said that she would eat her cereal every morning. Her favorite breakfast food was cereal, and so she would eat her cereal and watch Winnie the Pooh every single morning. And it seemed like Teekah was kind of an old soul. Her family called her my little old lady, and she was kind of shy. She never really wanted to be away from her mommy, but she was a happy baby. She was always smiling, and like I said, she always wanted to be with her mom. Right around the time that Teekah's baby sister was born, Robert, their father, was arrested on theft charges, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. It appears, though, that Robert never had any other run-ins with the law before or after his theft charges. And the relationship between Teresa and Robert broke down while he was incarcerated. And in January 1999, Teresa was in a new relationship. At the time of Teekah's disappearance, Robert was serving time. He was in McNeil Island Correction Center. And once he was released from prison, Teresa and Robert did reconcile. So even though they had kind of fallen apart during that incarceration, they found their way back to each other despite Teekah being missing. Saturday, January 23rd, 1999 was a cold and rainy night in Tacoma, Washington. And this isn't very unusual. If you've ever been to Tacoma, it is very rainy there. We lived there for about 6 months, I think. My husband was a travel nurse, and so we lived there during the rainy season, and it does rain, let me tell you. So this isn't unusual, but it was a cold and rainy night, and this is something that is important to this story. So, it was a cold, rainy night in Tacoma, Washington. It was around 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and they had had about a half an inch of rain that day. And it was Saturday night. It was a busy night at the bowling alley. It was called the New Frontier Lanes Bowling Alley, and it was at the 4700 block of Center Street in Tacoma, Washington. It was a popular night for families, but it also was league night at the bowling alley, and so not a single parking spot was left open in the parking lot. There were 32 lanes, there was a bar and a restaurant, and there was an arcade. And so there were people everywhere. And in total, there were about 300 people present that night. Teresa and her family, all of her children, including Teekah, went out for a night of bowling with their extended family. And there were over a dozen extended family members there to enjoy the evening. Teresa and the kids arrived at the New Frontier Bowling Lanes at about 8:30 p.m. And the family had rented 2 lanes, number 7 and number 8. So like I said, there were a lot of family members there that night, and they all kind of knew to keep an eye on the kids, just making sure that they weren't getting out of hand, getting out of eyesight, and just making sure that they were all safe, especially since there was a lot going on that night. All of the adults knew that they kind of needed to keep an eye on all of the different kids. Teresa, Teekah's mom, remembered that evening a woman had come up to her and asked to hold Teekah. She thought it was kind of odd, but at the same time, Teekah was a cute little baby, and so she didn't think too much of it at the time. But she did deny the request, and she moved on with her night of bowling and didn't give much thought to it after that. That night, Teekah was dressed in a green Tweety Bird sweatshirt or t-shirt. It's kind of up in the air whether or not it was a sweatshirt or a t-shirt, but it was a green Tweety Bird shirt. She was wearing white sweatpants and black and white Air Jordan sneakers. Her hair was pulled up into ponytails, and she was proudly carrying a little clear purse with a fish design on it. And inside of her purse, she had little candies and quarters that she had gotten for Christmas from one of her uncles. And guess what kind of candy it was? It was Starburst, her favorite. And throughout the night, Teekah seemed to be really drawn to the arcade, in particular the claw machine in the arcade, because if you've ever seen one, I'm sure you have, but they're full of stuffed animals, and they're just like hypnotizing to children. Children are drawn to these claw machines, and Teekah was not immune to this. She wanted to go to the claw machine. And so at some point, one of her uncles took her to the arcade, to the claw machine, and she used her little quarters to play the game. And lo and behold, Teekah won a stuffed animal from the claw machine, and she proudly brought it up to her mother and asked if she could give it to her baby sister, which is so sweet. A little 2-year-old, stuffed animals are like gold to them, and so the fact that she wanted to give this to her baby sister is just the sweetest thing ever. A little while later, Teekah headed back over to the arcade where a lot of her older cousins were playing, and the adults were all just kind of keeping an eye on all of the kids. Teresa was standing at the counter that separated the bowling lanes from the arcade area, and she stood there because she had a really good view of the bowling lanes but also the arcade, so she could keep an eye on all of the kids. And Teresa remembers the last time seeing Teekah in the arcade area at around 10:15 p.m. And she said that she remembered seeing her sitting at a racing game called Cruisin', and she was eating her Starburst candies out of her clear purse. The racing game that Teekah was sitting at was about 6 feet from the side door, and that led to the east side of the parking lot. This door is described as being very large and very heavy. It was assumed that Teekah would not have been strong enough to open the door on her own because she was only 2 years old and she was a tiny little thing. Sometime between 10:15 and 10:30, it was Teresa's turn to bowl, and her then boyfriend at the time, not Teekah's father Robert, her boyfriend at the time, because Robert was incarcerated, remember? Teresa's boyfriend was taking his turn watching over the kids. And Teresa's boyfriend said that he turned his back for just a second to watch her bowl, and in that time, Teekah disappeared. According to Teresa's sisters, Dawn, it must have been 10 to 15 seconds that she walked away. It was that close. Someone had to be watching. Teresa initially thought that Teekah might be playing hide and seek, so she scanned the arcade area, in between the games and the seats. She couldn't find Teekah anywhere. They then checked the bathrooms and stepped outside into the parking lot and called out for Teekah, but still they were not finding her. At this point, the family members realized that something was wrong, so they all started searching the area and the building. Teekah was a very shy little girl. She only wanted her mommy. She didn't really like to get hugs from other people, especially strangers, and she wasn't known to wander off on her own. She liked to stay close to her mom. Teresa said she wouldn't go outside on her own. She's a mama's girl. She sleeps with me and her blanket, and if I'm not there, she's crying. And if she doesn't have her blankie, she's crying. Not long after Teekah disappeared, the bowling alley announced over the loudspeaker that there was was a missing toddler, and employees and patrons started to search for the little girl. Customers were checking under tables, they were checking in the personal areas, in the bowling alley lanes. Anywhere they thought that a toddler might have gone, they were searching. One of the bowling alley's employees happened to be an off-duty police officer, and he was the one to report Teekah missing to the police. Within 15 minutes, the off-duty officer and staff stopped patrons from entering and exiting the building, and they had closed off the parking lot and were doing a full search of the building, and they were checking cars as they were leaving the parking lot. Despite the bowling alley having surveillance cameras on the interior and exterior of the bowling alley, the cameras were not turned on that night. And it seems like this is something that we say in almost every true crime case. Why are these cameras never on when they need to be on? Which would be always, I would think, but why are they never on? It's such a horrible coincidence that when these bad things happen, the cameras are never on. It's just so frustrating, and yeah, it's just infuriating. After the police arrived, which was about 15 minutes after Teekah had disappeared, they immediately started searching the cars as they were leaving the bowling alley. Some people remember their trunks and back seats being searched, while others don't remember this, so it's kind of unclear what actually happened. But I believe that they probably were searching at least the back seats for sure. But the family seems to be pretty on board with what the police have done, and so I tend to lean towards them having searched the trunks as well. Roadblock was pretty immediately set up, and searches started around the bowling alley. 8 search dogs were used to search Teekah's scent, and a helicopter scanned the neighborhood, and infrared sensors were used to try to find heat sources that might be the lost toddler. Local landfill was also searched. Searching a 1.5-mile radius from the bowling alley for more than 15 hours, nothing of note was found. Police questioned all of the local sex offenders, searched their homes. However, they were all cleared. No Amber Alert was issued because Washington State hadn't initiated that process yet. At about 5 p.m. the following day, Pierce County Sheriff Sergeant Cindy Figueroa would say to the media, "There's no concrete evidence about what happened. She simply vanished into thin air." An early theory was that Teekah had wandered off on her own. She was only 6 feet from the arcade door. However, the door was very heavy. It was nighttime. Teekah wasn't known to wander off, and it was cold and rainy that night. So by Sunday, police were starting to doubt the theory that Teekah had wandered off on her own. Teekah's parents and family members were looked into. Teekah was definitely at the bowling alley that night. Many patrons remembered seeing her there, and so they started looking into Teekah's mother. Teresa had absolutely no motive, and she volunteered for 2 polygraph examinations just to clear her name, and she passed both of them. Know that they're not really admissible, and some people really love polygraphs, some people really don't like them, but the fact that she volunteered to do them and she passed them, I think that says a lot. Other family members also volunteered to take polygraph examinations. As far as I know, all of them passed, and they were all cleared. Teekah's father, Robert, was obviously cleared because he was incarcerated at the time of her disappearance. The FBI and the Center for Missing and Exploited Children quickly became involved in the search for Teekah Lewis. They interviewed employees and patrons of the bowling alley. They checked phone records on the payphone at the bowling alley, and they widely accepted that Teekah had been abducted and foul play was most likely involved. Tacoma Police Department was working closely with the FBI, and one theory was that Teekah was taken by somebody close to the family. Another theory focused on the possibility that she had been taken by a stranger. Law enforcement set up a tip line, and they received about 75 tips within 24 hours, which is quite a few, and more than 24 detectives were assigned to work on the case full-time for the first month following the disappearance, and they were working tirelessly. They were trying to find this little girl. In the days and weeks following Teekah's disappearance, police interviewed most of the people that were at the bowling alley that night, and most of those people they interviewed more than one time. And throughout all of those interviews, nobody claimed to see anything. They didn't see anything unusual that night. They never heard any children screaming or crying, and just nothing had seemed off to them during their time at the bowling alley up until Teekah went missing. Because there was no surveillance video, the police relied on the patrons' home videos that they had taken that night. And so they searched those videos tirelessly. However, they didn't find anything of value in those videos. Now, I said that nobody had really seen anything of import during their time at the bowling alley. However, a year later, somebody came forward and they did report something suspicious. They released publicly that one bowling alley employee reported seeing a car, possibly a late 80s or 90s model, maroon or purple Pontiac Grand Am. The car sped out of the parking lot around 10:30 p.m., almost running the employee down. Initially, they wrote it off as teenagers, but then they heard about Teekah and reported it just in case. At the time, nothing was thought of it. It wasn't followed up any further. 48 hours after Teekah was reported missing, search dogs led investigators across the street from the bowling alley to a bushy area. Stashed under the bushy area was a pile of men's clothing. Found. They found a navy blue Busy Works brand wool pea coat in the size large, a white pair of Lee brand jeans, a Columbia brand button-down plaid shirt. There are a few distinguishing characteristics about these clothing, so I'm going to go into that right now. The wool pea coat, the initials LS or JS were written on the label. After investigating this a little bit further, a local confirmed that the initials that were on the wool coat were an identifying mark that Value Village, a thrift store, would mark on their clothing. So it wasn't anybody's initials, it was probably just from the thrift store. Lee brand jeans, they were stained with either purple or blue ink, and they were in the size 34 waist and 32 length. Columbia button-down plaid shirt was blue and green with white and yellow plaid, and it did not have a tag on it. Something interesting about this clothing is that there was no mold or mildew found on it, so it was determined that the clothing had been dumped there recently, and it was considered suspicious but not officially connected to Teekah's disappearance. On January 30th, 1999, America's Most Wanted filmed a reenactment to generate more attention to the case. A tip was reported that a man was acting suspiciously at the taping. He was tall and burly with brown curly hair, a thick mustache, and an acne-covered face. Police at the time didn't see anything important about the tip, and so there was no further investigation into it. We're going to rewind a little bit and go back 2 months before Teekah's disappearance. There was another incident at the New Frontier Lanes bowling alley where a 4-year-old boy was sexually molested in the bathroom. Another patron had walked in and found the little boy crying in the bathroom stalls. The suspect responsible was described as a white man in his 30s of medium build, shoulder-length scraggly or curly brown hair, a large nose, mustache, and pockmarks on his face. The father reported the assault to the bowling alley security guard, and he assumed that the security guard would then take it to the police. However, it was never reported. On this particular night at New Frontier Lanes, private security was on duty. It wasn't an off-duty police officer like it was on the night of Teekah's disappearance. So that may be why it was never reported. They just didn't know the protocols. A few weeks later, a man with the same description attempted to lure a 6-year-old boy out of the same arcade at the same bowling alley. It said that he grabbed the boy's hand, who immediately started trying to pull away. And when this caught other patrons' attention, the man tried to insist that he was the boy's father. This seemed to be working until the boy's mother came looking for her son, and then the man fled. And this incident was never reported to police. Fast forward a little bit up to the day Teekah went missing. A few hours earlier, before her disappearance, around 2 p.m., a man with the same description as all of the previous other incidents was seen at a local park less than a mile away from the bowling alley. He was seen talking to 2 young boys and trying to lure them into the bathroom with him. The boy's father intervened, and he chased the man from the scene. The man jumped into a dark blue 1995 Pontiac Grand Am. The father let it go and didn't report it to police until 3 days later when he saw Teekah's story on the local news. 4 months after Teekah disappeared, the body of a headless African-American girl was found. Teresa did not believe that this was her daughter. Teresa always believed and really hoped to the bottom of her heart and her core that whoever took Teekah took her to make her their own child. And later in 2005, it was determined not to be the body of Teekah. So Teresa's gut instinct was right. It wasn't Teekah. It was determined to be the body of 3-year-old Erica Michelle Grain, also known as Precious Doe. And there's no indication as of right now that the 2 cases are connected. In 2001 in Kansas City, Missouri, another unidentified toddler girl's body was found. The police were so certain that this was Teekah that they told Teresa to prepare for the worst. After DNA comparison, however, it was revealed that the toddler was not Teekah. Today, the bowling alley does not exist anymore. A Home Depot now stands where it stood. And in 2002, when the land was being prepared for development, police kept a close eye on the progress. They believed that Teekah's remains would be found there. However, nothing was found. In April 2006, Teresa was notified by a private investigator that he had found Teekah. He said that there was a girl living in an RV park in Texas with her mother, and the private investigator was absolutely convinced that this little girl was Teekah. Tacoma police, however, were not as confident in this. The girl had different birthmarks than Teekah, but to ensure that all leads were followed up on, they did a DNA test. After an agonizingly long wait, it was determined that the child was not Teekah. One good thing that came from this, though, was that it brought Teekah's story back into the headlines. No solid leads were developed. However, a reward for $27,000 was announced for information leading to the recovery of Teekah and the prosecution of her abductor. At this point, detectives released never-before-seen home video of Teekah that had been taken at a family Christmas celebration 1 month before her disappearance. And they hoped that this would help jog somebody's memory and urge people to think back if they were there, trying to get them to remember any small piece of information that could possibly help. In October 2009, Teekah's photo and description was featured on the side of Gordon trucks. They traveled all over the United States, and they were part of the Homeward Bound program. It was a program introduced by the Washington State Patrol and Gordon Trucking to help find missing children. Under this program, photos of 25 missing children have been featured since 2006. From this, police received a few tips, but none were substantial, and Teekah's case went cold again. In 2010, the family held the annual candlelight vigil, and a man approached Teresa and told her that he had psychic visions and that he believed that Teekah was buried at Point Defiance Park in Tacoma, Washington. This was only about 6 miles away from the new Frontier bowling lanes, and it left Teresa with an uneasy feeling that he would report this to her and not to detectives. Teresa went to the police with this information, and after they spoke to the man, they decided that the information was credible enough that they wanted to follow up with the investigation, and an excavation of the area was ordered. A few days later, investigators dug up an 8 by 12-foot section of a native garden at Point Defiance Park. It's not clear what they were looking for, but we do know that they didn't find any information relating to Teekah's disappearance. In July 2012, detectives searched a house in Tacoma belonging to a man named John William Black. Black had been seen at the New Frontier Lanes the night of Teekah's disappearance. He had pled guilty to attempting to abduct a 3-year-old child at another Tacoma bowling alley, Tower Lanes, in October 2010. Cadaver dogs were brought in and they hit on a specific area in his backyard. His yard was dug up, but they didn't find anything substantial. He denied having anything to do with Teekah's disappearance, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. 2020, Teekah's missing persons case was reopened. As part of this, police released a witness statement of a 17-year-old who was at the bowling alley the night Teekah went missing. The teen went into the restroom and bumped into a man coming out. This man bumped him hard and kept walking without apologizing. It said that this man was in his 30s, he was white, about 5'11", with long curly brown hair, pockmarks on his face, and a brown mustache. It was the same description of the man that had been acting suspicious at the America's Most Wanted reenactment. 17-year-old boy said that the man was carrying a little girl who appeared to be mixed race. At the time, he assumed the man was with his daughter, and he didn't think much of it. However, when he went home and he saw that Teekah had been reported missing, he realized that it was the same little girl that was with that man. And his father went to report what he'd seen to police, but for unknown reasons, a formal statement was never taken at the time, and he wasn't contacted until 2020. And that's when he was finally interviewed about what he had seen that night. Several more instances leading up to Teekah's disappearance came to light with the reopening of her case. They were all involving a mysterious, bushy-haired, mustached man. In November 2020, detectives showed Teresa a photo of a man that they believe was at the bowling alley the day of Teekah's abduction. Teresa said that when she was shown this picture, all she could do was cry. Teresa said that she remembered the man in the photo at the bowling alley in 1999 on the day that Teekah disappeared. And she said if that's the case, there's no way that Teekah is here right now. She described the photo and said it was a white male with brown hair and a pock-marked face, and said that he is not the type of man you'd want around your children. Teresa also made an alarming mention. She said that she recalls seeing that man following the Facebook page that she runs that is dedicated to finding Teekah. This person was apparently still monitoring what was going on in the investigation. The Facebook page, if you would like to take a look at it and follow it and help with any information that you might know, is called Help Find Missing Teekah Lewis, and I'll have it linked below for you. Teresa has worked and is still working tirelessly to find Teekah. She wants to bring her baby home. Robert Lewis, Teekah's dad, is also holding out hope and searching for his daughter. He says that he holds a lot of guilt for serving time while Teekah went missing. He's quoted as saying, "Teekah, Daddy loves you to death. I miss you so much. Life has never been the same, and it probably won't ever be the same. I don't wish this upon anyone. I hope another family doesn't have to go through what I have been through, but there are miracles happening every day. I believe my Teekah is out there, and she's going to come home one day," says Teresa. Detective Julie Deer of the Tacoma Police Department says that it's possible that Teekah is still alive, and she may have been too young to remember that she had been abducted. And we've seen this with other cases before, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. That hope is what keeps Teekah's family moving forward every day. Teekah's disappearance has had an impact on more than just her family. On February 6, 1999, an event was held at a Tacoma mall to fingerprint and photograph children, and that was prompted by Teekah's disappearance. We're expected to service 10,000 children that day. The Teekah Lewis Act was signed off by the governor later that year in 1999. It designated $540,000 for the following 2 years to create a special task force within the Washington State Patrol to assist agencies with disappearances of children. Every year, Teresa holds a candlelight vigil for Teekah in January, and she asks for toys and clothing to be donated during the vigil to help children in need. Teekah is asthmatic and requires medical supervision, as well as the usage of an inhaler and/or ventilator. Teekah received medical care prior to her 1999 disappearance at Indian Health Practitioners in Puyallup, Washington, a nationwide clinic available for Native Americans. Teekah is a multiracial female. She has black hair and brown eyes. Teekah is of African American, Caucasian, and Native American descent. She has a large birthmark on her left buttock and red natural highlights in her hair. She has patches of light discoloration on her face and the left side of her buttocks as the result of eczema. Teekah has facial dimples and pierced ears. If you have any information about the disappearance of Teekah Lewis, please contact Tacoma Police Department at 1-253-798-4721 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this case. If you have any information about Teekah, please reach out, even if it is the smallest detail. Teekah deserves to be found, and her family deserves to find her. Again, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you haven't already, make sure that you're subscribed. Hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.